Hello, everyone. We have really incredible guest. I'm excited to speak with Matt today because I've been following his podcast and actually some of the interviews that he's done. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. He's a senior editor at Panoptica. Is that correct?
You said it
Yeah.
right. Panoptica. Yes.
Awesome. And the co-owner and host of Access Returns, a podcast production company and YouTube channel. So for his Coulter's creative brand, he transforms complex ideas into accessible insights, helping people make better connections and approach challenges with greater curiosity. And Matt, I heard about you through other podcasts, and you're always mentioned as the person that connected people. You love connecting people, bringing them together, and you really, I think, bring out the best in people in your interviews. You have this incredible gift in finding their gift. And so I want to talk to you in this age of AI where we're constantly bombarded with content that maybe is not of best quality. And sometimes we forget that that human connection is really where it's at. Tell me about how you think about connecting people, creativity, and just in general, how do we continue to live our lives in this bot droid age, right?
There's this weird thing that keeps happening, and this is observational, is that we want things increasingly to be more and more perfect. And I think we can point at this trend. This probably certainly starts in my childhood. This is like somewhere in the Gen X to millennial handoff between like the 70s and the 80s, the idea of getting stuff just right started to become really important to people. And the biggest problem in getting stuff just right and in that way, in that placement of like not screwing it up, whether it was PC culture in the 90s or whatever else, is that then we introduced the internet and social media. And when we introduced social media, we took a generation who was already raised on get this stuff just right. And then we turned it into a performative blood sport.
Yeah.
We needed likes and affirmation and the right comments and all the other things. And now flash forward, I'll be 44 in a couple of weeks here. And it's, if I look around my immediate peer group in particular, I see this performative blood sport everywhere where people are chasing likes, they're chasing engagement, they're chasing, well, I can't do that because I don't have the right amount of social media followers. Or I can't have this career because I'm now this far embedded in this. And I need everything from the participation trophy and the modern versions of it to I just need this to feel like I'm doing all the things right for it to be okay. And the reality is, like, we don't need to do that. It's okay if it's messy, and actual life is messy.
Yeah.
And you're making me think of this. I think about this a lot. I don't talk about this often. I went to college for music, and at the school I went to school with, the founder of the school was this guy named Jackie McLean. And Jackie played with Miles Davis, and he played with John Coltrane, he played with Mingus and all these people, and great stories. And Jackie was still there when I was at the Hart School of Music at the University of Hartford. And Jackie would give this speech that I heard a variation of a couple of times, was like, one of the problems with playing music, with playing jazz in particular, were the labels. It's like, they don't say we're like, they say we're playing music. We're not working on music. They don't take it seriously. They think we're playing. They say, oh, he's just doing jazz. They're not saying like it's different from classical. All the language diminishes the art that we're doing.
Yeah.
And he was like, you have to get past all that. You have to earn your respect for the art that you're doing, but then you also have to realize the way it's being framed. So what I see today is people want everything to be so perfect, and they're worried about the performative nature. And it's like, if you're willing to just be a little messy around the edges, the amount of leeway and grace when people are like, oh, we can just talk, like, we don't have to do it this way. It's so disarming. And it's so powerful right now that everybody's worried about if they have too many M dashes in their thing, to just, as I've done multiple times, hold up the Emily Dickinson book and be like, I don't care. Did you make something worth creating? Let's talk about it. That's fun. And if it's not, and you can't talk about it, then okay, I'll find somebody else who did. I have real life friends, not just internet friends. It's a rich world if you're willing to play.
It is, but it's even more fun when you play with other people, right? Jazz is really, to your music analogy, it's amazing because people join together and they play instruments and they kind of play off each other. It's that beautiful connection that happens during that music that really brings those instruments together. And that's why I like jazz a lot. And I think, to your point, it's the same with people. The best things you've ever worked on it's that connection. It wasn't because it was perfect, but it was that synergy of creating something new that you didn't know the outcome of, right?
Art is defined by its imperfections. It's the things at the margin where it's not perfect that actually give it reward, that give it meaning, that give it the experience of maybe you're trying to find the imperfections. You're trying to figure out if Mona Lisa is smiling. You're trying to figure out what there's a remarkable book, I think it's called Pictures and Tears from a few years ago. And it's basically the logs from museums. I think the first chapter is just the logs from museums and this analysis of people experiencing what they wrote going in and out of a Rothko exhibit. And there's no perfect explanation. It could be an art critic who's walking in, or it could be a child who's walking in. But the idea is it's rumbling with these imperfections is actually reminds us of what it is to be human, to be alive. It's the human condition. And AI is now giving us this comparative ruler where we can measure it against this perfect output.
Yeah.
And that creates a beautiful differentiation that we all have access to of going to play. And if you're willing to do that with other people and say, oh, we're comfortable with making a little mess together, not because we have to move fast and break things and do all the scale to the moon crap.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, make a mess, make it small, do it with people you're enjoying, and see what happens. It's a pretty good life.
It is. But it's so hard. Like, to your point, it sounds amazing, right? But every day we wake up, we have our alarm clock and we're like, okay, now I got to show up at work. I have these meetings. And you fall into this routine like day in, day out. And so when you do step away, even for 10 minutes, to work on that art project, to have that conversation, it's almost like it's an unusual thing. So how do you build habits that it doesn't become like a one-off, but it's really part of how you live your life?
There's an important distinction in this framing, and I think part of it is the alarm clock and the routine. I love the alarm clock and the routine. My wife endlessly will make fun of me in a very loving way, as like I am the ultimate man of convenience with so many things.
Yeah.
It's like, where should we go tonight? We should go there. You're only saying that because that's down the street. It's like, well, yeah, but then
if you know what you're going to get, right?
If I know what I'm going to, like, you just took 18 decisions out of the equation.
Yeah.
And yes, I'd rather, like, I'm less worried about that and I'm more worried about the 6 things that come after this. So if I can just condense those decisions, then that's a type of framework that I really enjoy and appreciate. And it's funny. She's actually very, very similar to me in that way. So we're very complementary in that, but I appreciate that she reminds me of sometimes that's my default assumption. So inside of this, it's this awareness. I have this thing called the creator flywheel. I think you put the creator flywheel next to the consumer flywheel. And I'll explain what those both are. So the idea is no matter what, even on your most boring, pre-scheduled, everything is as it is day, it starts with, at the top of this flywheel is what I say is the muse. And the muse is just, it's external to you. So the point is this comes from outside of your head in some way. It's the world that's just going on doing its thing outside. And what happens is the muse will trigger the first stop on this creator flywheel, whether I'm mirrored or not, you do the clock yourself at home. The first stop on this thing is your curiosity. And curiosity is you being aware of something in the world that triggered something in your head. And this is where we flip between creator and consumer and what mode you're in. Okay. When you notice something in the external world and now it's captured your curiosity, your next option is, am I going to do something with it? Or am I just going to consume this thing?
Yeah.
In the pure evolutionary psychology standpoint, it's, I'm out in the wild. I found a bag of items and I go, oh my God, free items still in the package. It's safe. Get my calories, get my sugar. I don't know when I'll find this again. Get the dopamine hit, put a bow on it. Pure consumer is just, you're following that thing and the loop basically doesn't stop there. I'll go on with it in a second, but it's the idea of I've just consumed this thing and I haven't done anything with it. Creativity falls. It's the opposite of the muse. The muse is external. Curiosity happens. Creativity is internal. This is where I decide I want to do something with this. I can reflect on it. I can make art with it. I can just have a fun conversation with you on this podcast about it. But the point is, creativity means I turned it from something to something else. And I appreciate whatever level of transformation I've put it through. And that last step, opposite to where curiosity is habit. And this is the most important part, because just like the muse begets curiosity, begets creativity. Creativity then begets habit. Habit begets looking for the muse again. And this is why it's a flywheel, because part of the habit isn't just to put the bow on the thing you just created. It's to go out and look for the muse again. That step is super.
Yeah. I'm curious. How do you listen to meditation? Do you listen to your favorite podcast where do you find the muse that kind of starts this flywheel?
Any of those places. They're all great. I know one of my favorite activities in the morning is like a quick scan. Usually one of the first things that'll scan in the morning is either in my podcast app or like on YouTube after I've like had the coffee and done the normal morning routine stuff. It's like, okay, my brain is fired up, exercising, stretching, going for a walk, whatever, doing the dishes. Give me that thing to listen to that's just like going to knock me off course for a minute, take me out of my own head before I start the day. And I do the scroll and I just look for the first thing that is like, I want to hear about that today. And like over the weekend, it was getting caught up on a bunch of my like fantasy English Premier League podcasts that I listened to. And then a Chris Sacca interview, the great venture founder and investor. Like he did a great thing with Jackson Dahl, one of the coolest interviews I've heard in a long time. It was like 3 hours long, devoured the whole thing over the course of the weekend. And then, you know, some other obscure like news oriented stuff because I had to have this macro markets conversation this morning. I was like, well, I guess I should hear about this Bill Pulte 50-year mortgage and whatever Bessent said out of the Treasury this week because I have to talk about it for work. Curiosity is reverse engineering this. Curiosity goes back to the muse. Where's the muse? Where is that? How to find the habit. I just take a bunch of stuff that I'm interested in, throw it at the wall and see what hits my attention today. Because on one day, it's just none of this looks interesting. I'm going to go back to the book I'm listening to, or I'm going to put music on. And another day, I'm like, Lee and Sam have a new FPL family. It's Sunday night. I love that they post these things live. I want to hear how much she's going to beat up on her loving husband because Liverpool lost this game, which was part of my morning today.
Yeah.
But the muse is always there. We just need the habit and the practice of invoking the muse to say like, oh, muse, what do you have for me today? Extra Stephen Pressfield, extra prayer to the muse from the Greek philosophy, the Greek literature. You just need a habit to do it. And it's always right there for you. There's no shortage of ideas. The world is full of ideas.
Yeah. There's so many ideas, as you said.
There's too many.
Too many. It's overwhelming, right? You
It's
wake
a feature,
up.
not a bug, because you can only eat one at once at a time anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a feature. And I think being creative is a feature, right? And that's what, you know, I'm hoping that that's what AI honestly will lead to, is that we can do less math and maybe to be more creative. Who knows?
So here's the danger though. So in that consumer flywheel, all we do is replace creativity at the bottom with consumer. And the consumption flywheel, the problem is, and this is the real AI challenge with AI slop and everything else. People get to that consumption phase and then it goes back to habit. This is doom scrolling. Doom scrolling is I see something negative on my phone.
Yeah.
It has my curiosity. I now consume it instead of reflecting or doing anything with it. And now the habit is I scroll again. That empty consumption gets you nowhere. The Panoptica, the media outlet that I'm a part of, one of the big ideas of Panoptica is to help us with consumption and to use AI to ask the question, why am I reading this now? Or why am I hearing this now? And in that consumption phase, after the muse, after your curiosity is triggered, asking this question, why is this being framed and served up to me in this light? And does that matter to me in some way? Do I have to parse this? What do I do before I return back into the world? And even that, just to change your consumption habit, it just helps keeping it from being the overwhelm that you expressed, because it's easy to be in that trap. And I think that's a trap of not knowing how to process the volume of information that's coming in. That's that idea of like, I'm going to butcher the quote. I feel like this is from Howard Lindzen. It's the idea of like, you have a filter problem. I'm butchering what it is.
Yeah.
It's literally what it is. You just have a filter problem.
And it's overwhelming because the feeds, they feed you more of the same thing. So you almost start living in this.
Well, that's the filter bubble. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly,
And the
right?
more you scroll, the more they feed you of the same things that you were looking at. And at some point, you're just looking at cats and baby videos. I don't know.
Yes.
But it's I know you talk, it sounds really great, right? And I'm a big believer in, like you said, in habits, because I'm a creative person. Like I like to paint. I'm not a musician, but I do like colors, and that's how I use my creativity. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm just going to sit down and paint for 15 minutes today. And whatever comes to my head at this point is what I'm going to do. And it doesn't matter if it's pretty or not. It's just for my consumption. The part that I think you're really good at is this network effect. So it's one thing to sit down and listen to a podcast or philosophy or reflect on something that you've been thinking about by yourself. But then it's a whole other thing to find people who might have a different view or are working on a similar problem that kind of fit into that. What is your process around that? Really like finding synergies with others to work on projects.
So I learned a really valuable lesson. This is like this ancient information. Somebody brought this story out of me earlier today, so I'm still thinking about this.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, I grew up in a house with a lot of music around in all sorts of ways, but the physical medium. So I remember we had the stack of records and the stack of 45s in my house. And to me, once I had permission to touch the record player, that's a big rite of passage.
Right.
Once I had permission to touch the record player, like playing singles, playing 45s this is Spotify before there was Spotify in many ways. So I didn't think it was weird or strange to put the Jackson 5 on and then listen to Johnny Cash doing Boy Dame Sue and then whatever. And then likewise to like turn around and have the radio on in the other room or MTV on in the background and going like by the time we got to Aerosmith and Run DMC, which is a pivotal moment in my life, seeing that on television, by the time we got there, I was well versed in the music of Aerosmith because of my parents. And yet also like really interested in this whole emergent like rap hip hop thing that was like kind of at the margins and felt a little bit risky and nobody really like in suburban Pennsylvania. So this idea that you could put two things next to each other and it was okay that they made no sense was really fascinating. On top of that, I learned to love this, like the mix of highbrow and lowbrow together. So I love this idea that you can take like a really high level concept and make it really dumb, or something really dumb and make it really fancy. And there's a lot of comedy in that. There's a lot of humor in that. And so another thing that I learned growing up was there was this great thing, especially like in punk rock bands in the 90s, where they would do like some kitschy cover from the 60s or the 80s or whatever, and they do their like new genre specific version of it. And it was a dumb piece of novelty, but it was like, here's two disparate things. Watch what happens when we mash them together. It's like the early versions of like mashups, you know, and hip hop music is all about this. I've written a lot about this, actually, this like topic of how this changes. There's this pivotal moment in EPMD where they break the rule. Eric Sermon breaks this rule that you're supposed to wait like 10 years or a generation before you can sample an artist. And this Troutman record comes, the Robert Troutman record comes out, the guy from Zap with the vocoder stuff. And he basically takes it and he flips it like 6 months after it came out on this record. It's called The Crossover as a song. And everybody's like, whoa, like you're not allowed to smash those things together yet. That's not allowed. That was an unspoken rule. And you just told the world it was okay to mash these things together. So this goes back to the playing. This goes back to the messing. This goes back to this idea of like, you have to proactively smash stuff together. So for me, one of my favorite habits, and we're about 8 years strong now, about 8 years ago, I started my Cultish Creative blog, and every single day for 8 years, I've posted one reflection, just something that caught my attention. I reflect on it, and it's not a journal. I call it a personal archive. It's also not something like, you're not going to get hacks and tips and tricks from me per se. Yeah. It's exclusively for me, but it's me reflecting on it. Lots of times I will take two disparate ideas and smash them together. It could be music, it could be finance, it could be art, it could be somebody I heard on a podcast.
I like that. Yeah. And that's
but I make sure,
yeah.
And I practice the combination. And that becomes the most important thing, is like just practicing the combining of this stuff. And sometimes a bunch of people read it. Sometimes nobody reads it. Sometimes it gets a bunch of email responses. Sometimes not. I don't even really promote this thing because it's just people find it. And then that's the way that it works. I've since taken that, and on my Cultish Creative YouTube channel, like I have this show that we were talking about, Just Press Record, where I introduce strangers. So I don't tell them who they're going to meet before they show up. And this is my way to take two people from different walks of life and just be like,
see how they get along. Yeah.
And if there was ever a podcast where these two people were on, I realized there was lots of people that I'm never going to hear on the podcast that I want to hear on a podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, what if I subversively invite them into a podcast and get them to meet each other, and I'm just the host? So it's like a Barstool style conversation, and we capture what happens. And it's a really cool way to do that.
Combinations where people are just completely didn't know what to say, it just wasn't the right mix.
I pre-screen, so I look for people who are conversationalists to make sure of that. But I think what's really unique and interesting about, so number one, there's no real prep you can do for this because you can't plan on where two people are going to go, or it would devolve. I tell the people before, right when we start, I'm like, I am the host, but if you start asking them questions and they start asking you questions and I don't talk for an hour, that's fine.
It's okay.
Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take notes as we're going, and somewhere once we're an hour or so in, I'm going to say, hey, I've got notes, and that's how we're going to conclude this thing, is I'm going to read you a bunch of stuff that I wrote down while you're talking, and we're going to talk a little more about it to put a bow on this conversation. But I do a ridiculous intro in the beginning, which is basically Easter eggs for each of the guests, because I have to make myself look dumber than either of them feel in that moment.
So they feel more comfortable in having the conversation.
I deliberately make myself look really dumb to start, but also slip them a bunch of Easter eggs that go, I know a bunch of things about you.
I'm watching
And
you.
and most people are not going to recognize this,
Yeah.
but when like I'm thinking of this guy Ned Russin, who's a phenomenal musician. He's from my hometown originally, and he's gone on to do all this great stuff. I'll never forget like 20 something. Like I'm in college and I open a Rolling Stone and I'm like, I think that's Ned and Ben Russin, like in this, like in Rolling Stone, and it's like they're from my neighborhood. Like this is crazy with their band Title Fight, and he's gone on to make and do all this great music. So I had the chance to introduce him to this guy Keith Morris, he's like punk rock royalty, like the Circle Jerks and like founding member of Black Flag, really interesting guy. And they've never met or crossed paths for any reason, but Ned's in this like punk adjacent community too. And I put them together. And in the intro, it's like I made a reference to Ned's middle school band. And it was like, so now he's trying to like defend this, like explain what this thing was. And I've got Keith Morris on the other hand talking about this drummer that he used to play with from Peru. And like asking about, he's like, Salsa Shark, was that? He's like, no, that's my middle school band. It's like, was it like Cumbia? It's like, no, it literally was my middle school band with my brother in a drum machine.
But how do you do it? Speaking of that, like, how do you do your research? Do you know all these people like very well, or how do you find them? Like, what's that process like?
A lot of it is people that I get introduced to or I'm following online, or somebody writes a book or a blog post or is on a podcast. I'm like, oh, they're fascinating. And I will usually just cold reach out to them, or somebody else. Now, like the network has grown that I've done it for like a year and a half, where
Yeah.
people will send me people and be like, I would love if you did this for my friend.
Nice.
So
Okay.
now people refer people in fairly regularly, which is cool. And then it's just the cold outreach of saying, I know this sounds crazy, but I put a lot of time into thinking who you should pair with. And it doesn't mean I have a pair tomorrow for you, but if I meet somebody and I go, you know, who would be really great to see talk to this person?
You're like a matchmaker. I have this like Fiddler on the Roof matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match in my head
Yes,
right
lots
now.
of Fiddler on the Roof. And it's
Yeah,
very
that's
much a
amazing.
matchmaking thing. And I want to
Yeah,
see two people, Julia Duthie, who's a UK based like private equity executive and a very accomplished author, really incredible story. And she had been making music and doing stuff her whole life. And we kind of bonded over this. We both
yeah,
were playing music out in bars when we were way too young to be in bars and whatever else. And I had this other woman, Nancy Berger, who's Boston based, and she's like a finance industry consultant type, keynote speaker, like very, very accomplished. Nancy didn't become a musician until sometime in her early 40s. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to have these two like powerhouse, accomplished like women who command these audiences and all this other stuff, and to get them telling this story about this person who's like, I've done this my whole life, and this other person who's like, I didn't start till I was 40, and both of them hold it as like one of the most important things they did. And like the end of the conversation, they're like, are we best friends now? And they sent me a picture. They were together in Boston this summer, and it was like them with their spouses at a table, and I'm just like, yes, the matchmaker thing is it's become part of the goal to see if, and I've got a ton of those stories from doing it, which is, it doesn't matter that there's less than 500 subscribers on that YouTube channel. It's the most fun thing that I do.
I can see that. You're really interested in people. To me, it's always the people's stories, right? It's just, and that dynamic is how they will get along, what will happen, and when you bring them together, it's super fast.
And I can feel like my wife would groan if she heard me saying this out loud. She's probably like downstairs right now. She'll groan as I'm saying this. Like, we're all going to be forgotten, you know? Like, none of
Yeah,
this is actually really going to matter in
yeah.
any grand scale. Very few of us are going to change the world. Like, we're not going to invent something. And if we do, it's going to be on a tier like 3 tiers down from, windshield wipers, let alone like sliced bread or fire, the things nobody can mention who did it. And so if the only thing we can do is help the experience with each other now, then isn't that the most important thing we do, is just help with the quality of the relationships around us that we actually can exert some influence over? And I truly believe that that's a noble pursuit.
It is a really noble pursuit. I think someone with a bigger ego would say, well, what do you get out of it? Right? That's the question, is like, great, you introduce these people, and so
I
great.
get not doom scrolling out of it, and I get not, it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
was on social media. It's like, okay, well, I met somebody new, or I plotted something out, or I've experimented with something that's now out in the world that somebody else is going to come and find. I'm going to meet you, and you're going to talk about our mutual bogomil and like how that crosses over and fills in the gaps. That's a much more interesting way for me to spend time than being caught up in, again, the performative bullshit of others on social media.
I love that a lot. I just I struggle with that myself because all the performance measurements that society measures us on don't take that into consideration. There's not a performance measurement around how many connections, how many people did you help to connect and develop better relationships with.
It's a non-quantifiable thing, and it's important that we say this. And then it's important that we use tools like using AI or using things that can help us operationalize the parts that actually matter, not just, and I think we're at the other end of the pendulum on this. I do genuinely believe we're close to the end of this, where me with my investor hat on, it's like the whole idea of we have to build stuff to scale and change the world finally is starting to come down a little bit. The pendulum can't swing much further than AI. I know we'll try to push it into quantum computing or something next.
Yeah.
But the reality is we've hollowed out. There's a whole generation. There's lots of stuff with Gen Z and going down and younger in age. I know you have younger children in your life too, where
Yeah.
it's like they actually want connection and real stuff. And we've homogenized so much of everything else
Mm-hmm.
that those little connections are slowly, I think, becoming more and more publicly valuable now. We're like, I don't know what that means, but I really like this place or this person or this thing.
Well, if we look at the history of art, right, in Paris, there were always artists that got together, right, and talked about their art. And there's stories of Picasso and many others just hanging out. I think there's just so much to that, the fact how much that contributed to the art culture at that time and the development of these artists and popularity. Because at the end of the day, I think part of it is just that connection of, learning from each other, playing off each other kind of thing.
I think one of the great modern analogs to the salons and everything else is what comes out of hip hop rap, that whole culture, that whole segment, because the idea of music as an audio collage, and then that frames into the rest of it. And I say hip hop as a culture in the sense of like rap is something you do, rapping
Yeah.
is something, fashion is something, graffiti is something, dancing is something. These are all parts of this broader umbrella. And this is me as an 80s, 90s kid talking clearly. This is what KRS taught me to say. So inside of that umbrella, though, what we have is we have this idea of technology aiding and abetting people to basically make subtle shifts to make something their own. And one of my favorite things, and we were talking about before we recorded, is this Virgil Abloh idea. So Virgil Abloh, the great fashion and artistic eye and designer, he said a 3% change confers ownership. And that is to say, we can take technology, we can take an idea, we can add our own personal reflection for 3%. That means 97% you don't even have to touch. And 3% we can take something, and that Troutman song can become Crossover by EPMD. Or all these things can be made. Virgil can write, he can write Brick on My Brick for the Griselda fans. He can write shoelace on a shoelace on a shoe. And now that shoe can be worth that much more because that subtle change, that personal reflection confers the ownership. And then it invites others into the conversation, which is the key part about this. The hip hop culture idea of block parties and DJs and people getting together, dancing, singing along, knowing the words, having this communal orientation around this was a celebration of we all create this language together and then we all talk about it with each other and we bring in stuff that's external influence, but we're going to make it ours. It's going to be okay that we can be a bunch of kids in New York and we can sample a bunch of stuff that was made in Ohio or on the West Coast. Or we can be on the West Coast and we can be like, oh, you know what? I have this really great thing from, I mean, I'm just trying to give Ohio some love right now because lots of great music came from Ohio. But yeah, that conferring of ownership with a very minor change and doing it in a communal setting. There are so many examples of this. And it's a really wonderful thing. On the Panoptica website, I wrote this piece. It's for our Stories of America. And I talked about the compression of America. And that this specifically is one of the things. And through the eyes of the Minutemen, who are a great California punk rock band who merged lots of styles. And when the punk scene was like, you're not punk, you're doing like funk and folk music and all this stuff. And they were like, no, that is punk.
They
like,
redefined it, right?
Yeah. As soon as you defined it, you lost the entire script. And they did that very successfully on the West Coast. Successful in a small way, but what that group did was really, really special. And then the same, I compare and contrast that to the story of this guy E40, Bay Area rapper and entrepreneur, and they figured out, him and his friends and his family, luckily they had a very savvy business lawyer of an uncle, and they were like, we can sell 100,000 units in our neighborhood and the surrounding areas on the West Coast, and nobody knows it's going on in the rest of the country. This is in the 90s. So they flew to New York, and the deal they negotiated was like, okay, you're going to advance us the money for the first 100,000 units and then give us national distribution, and we'll participate on economics and the rest of the distribution. But all they did was negotiate for a deal that swapped an upfront payment for what they would have made anyway from doing their sales and traded that for national distribution. And it's like that empowered the community. Like you can go to the Bay Area now and you could get like Earl Stevens, E40, you can drink his wine, you could eat at his lumpia restaurant. He's invested a lot of that money back in his community. And it actually can be done by people who want to do this stuff.
That's really powerful. Just so much to think about, right? Because you talked about the muse and how to really make that part of your habit daily, right? To find the muse and then do something with it. And you talked a lot about connecting people randomly that you might have never met each other. And then you talked about how that actually builds communities, right? In the long term, at the end of the day, it's really about, connecting at a bigger scale. What do you, if you were to think like 5-10 years from now, if you had what does the future look like for you? Where do you see us going as people, as humanity?
Sort of like as a society? Like, is
Yeah.
that on that
With all
level?
these
Okay.
evolutions, are we going to become more human where we're, helping each other and becoming one earth, for lack of a better term? Or where are we going with, technology and AI kind of proliferating? And I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So I think, and I put a lot of weight, I've written quite a bit about this. I've been very moved, and a lot of thought has gone into Neil Howe's work on The Fourth Turning. Are you familiar with this book or any of this stuff?
No.
This is the way I always present Neil Howe. So first off, as a elder millennial or somebody who's on that line between Gen X and millennial, Neil Howe is the person who coined the term millennial with his partner back in the 90s, with his research partners since passed on. Like, he's the reason for all these generational cohort names that we have is based on that research. A lot of it is like star charts where I wouldn't put too much weight in it, but I think it's a really interesting thing. And I'll explain the personal connection and why in just a second. The way that I always pitch Neil Howe and why people should be aware of The Fourth Turning, I think the more recent book, The Fourth Turning is Here, is enormously useful. It usually gets absorbed into this like doomer outlook. And I personally find the book to be the complete opposite of that. Like, I was shocked when I found out people are like, oh, this is so like dark and bleak and it's predicting the end of the world or something. And I'm like, I didn't get that read. There's a great interview. My buddy Dave Nottig on our Excess Returns channel did an interview with Neil and talked about this, like what the role of a Gen Xer is in this thing. And like Neil's the same way. He's like, no, like this was not supposed to be some doomer thing. This is just observing this through history. And so the big idea is that at any point in the history of humanity, you look at any culture, any point in history, there's basically 4 generations that are alive in the same time. And those 4 generations will always have problems talking to each other. I grew up in a family, my parents had me when I was young, and their parents had them when they were young, and they're the oldest and I'm the oldest. So my parents are like just over 20 years older than me. Their parents were all of 40 years older than, like 50th birthday parties for all 4 grandparents. Like, that's my life growing up. Very compressed generations. I learned from a young age as the oldest of the grandkids and whatever else, almost the oldest. Shout out to my cousin Kari. She beat me by a few months. As the almost oldest, we learned to communicate cross-generationally at a very young age and not think anything of it. Like, I knew how to talk to adults as a kid. I knew how to talk to my younger siblings and cousins and whatever else as a kid. I've always kind of taken that for granted. We were always thrust into social and environmental settings where we had to deal with other people. There was a thing where I had to play guitar in church on a Sunday when I was very small, but I was already playing guitar. And I was like, I can't do this thing. And my parents were like, well, you have to call the guy and you have to tell him.
Right. We're not going to cover for you.
We're not going to cover for you. So the cool thing about what Neil Howe describes in this work and why it's so important to talk across generations is he paints where we are now. And he basically said sometime around 2000, like the mid part of the 2000s, he's like, this millennial cohort is going to grow up and they're basically resistive to these boomers who won't let them inherit the world yet. And they don't know what to do with the Gen Xers in the middle. I'm speaking from my generation, but they see them as like allies and colleagues in many ways, but they've given up on their parents, on the boomers in front of them. And this transition of power out of the boomers' hands, who have had all this luck and fortune and shaped the world in the way they shaped the world, it's going to be a rough transition. But inside of that, this generation is looking up at that generation saying, we don't want to do it that way. That generation is figuring out how they're going to let go in the autumn of their life, approaching the winter of their life. They have to let go. They will just die. And many jobs you can look at and go, they will just quit, die, or retire. And that's going to change everything if I stick at this for 10 or 20 years. And then behind us, we have the after effect. Because behind us, we now have a generation raised on social media, raised on technology, and we're finally feeling the pushback from people who are like, this messed up my life.
Yeah.
And whether you're reading Jonathan Haidt's work or the brilliant Freya India, who's got a book coming out, who's just talking about all the impacts that phones have had on her generation of Gen Z and lower, where there's a real resistance of like, we got to stop some of this stuff, guys, and talk about this. So as this whole thing like ages out, I think we will see more community. I think we will see more smaller scale stuff. I hope and wish that we break down some of the consumerish tendencies that are just like, we need to scale, we need to do bigger, we need to do this wealth trend. I hope we can let go of some of that stuff and get back to some better fundamental values of maybe the thing that makes you happy isn't the thing. Those will only happen though in conversations that we have to each other. Because if we don't have those conversations one-to-one and find out other people are like us in those messy middle spots, then we allow, big fan of like Venkatesh Rao and his work and the whole idea of, you're familiar with the Maya Millennial essay?
Yeah. I like
It's
that.
like they made McDonald's, and then when your kids are growing up, you're like, oh, like my generation again, like McDonald's is fun, Happy Meals, and they're called Happy Meals.
Right.
And then it's like, if I'm 30 though, or if I'm 25 and I'm still going to McDonald's, my parents would look at that and be like, ooh, like that's a
That's not
problem.
good.
And
Yeah.
so fast casual, Panera is born out of, wouldn't it be sad if your kids were still going to McDonald's and that was the option? So Panera exists. And I think having chains to solve these problems so that the parents can feel better and the kids can tell their parents something so they're like, that's not good cross-generational communication. And we're creating products that solve the wrong aspect of the problem. I think we're going to see a shift in the direction away from that. That's my optimistic stance. And I'm here for it because I think AI actually enables us to do this way, way better. Because now if I want to have a local restaurant or a venue or a whatever, I can go to ChatGPT and say,
Yeah.
like, write my business plan. How do I make this work in my community? What do I need to know about? What do I need to be aware of? How do I find a Matt or a Vicki in the world to help consult with me on this thing? And all of a sudden, we don't need the scale of a system anymore. We have these systems now that are hiding in our phones and these GPTs and other things that might actually unlock that next phase of flourishing.
I wish I had a drink. I would say, let's drink to the next phase of flourishing, right? Because that's
Cheers to flourishing.
cheers to the next phase of flourishing. I think so. I think it's super exciting. And I think what we talked about here, hopefully AI will allow us to be more creative, to connect more with people who can then create something new or just have a nice conversation with. This was really, really amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate your time and your insights. And I hope people subscribe to your channels and look more into your conversations because you're making a difference. So thank you for that.
As are you. These are all tools. We just have to actually use them for forces of good. It's not that hard and it's a lot of fun. So thank
It
you
is
very
a lot
much,
of
Vicki,
fun.
for having me
Yeah,
on.
thank you for having fun with me today. I appreciate it. Thanks.